We're going to be in Jonah. Um, Jonah is one of those things. How many people are familiar with Jonah? All right, let's try to. Don't lie in church, okay? How many people are familiar with Jonah? How many people know something about Jonah? Okay, all right. We all know something about Jonah. Your nursery may have been done in Jonah, right? Or it's a very common story, right? It's a children's story. A lot of times we get them in children's books, and what's the thing that you know about Jonah? What's the big takeaway from Jonah? What? What if I told you that that well only appeared in two sentences? Right? What if I told you that that was by no means the story of Jonah? Right? What if that's the huge takeaway that we always take, and every children's book cover has a picture of a whale on the cover of it, and it's all about how our God can make someone sustain in 3 days in the belly of a whale, in the belly of a big fish, or whatever, because it doesn't technically say whale, but it doesn't matter because it's not even about that, right? There's so many people that fight over, was it a whale, was it a big fish? It doesn't even matter. The whole story has nothing to do with what ate Jonah. Right? He only shows up in two sentences in the whole thing. Granted, Jonah's not that long. It's not that big of a book. But he only shows up for two sentences of it, and then he's done. Right? But we have been so conditioned to kind of think of Jonah and the whale, and you can't really even say Jonah. Like your mind wants to finish that with, and the whale, or the big fish, right? And so what we're going to try to do is we're going to spend a little bit of time in the book of Jonah. We're going to try to peel away this children's story outlook of it, because who knows? Like we've allowed. So we read the children's book stories to my kids, right? But they all water them down because they're for kids, right? They're for kids, and so you always come away with like some kind of takeaway from the story of like, be nice, right? Like, be a good person. Don't disobey God, right? It's always like some watered down, like they reduce every story to try to be a good person, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. You got to teach kids somewhere at some point, right? But the problem is, as adults, we never leave the children's stories, right? We continue to water down Jonah to just not obeying God, just like don't disobey God, right? We never leave the children's story, but who knows that the Bible is not written as children's stories. This is an adult story, and you have to be an adult to see what is going on inside of it. Jonah's a really wonderfully, masterfully created, I'm going to call it a parable. Whether it was real or whether it happened, Jonah was a real guy, but I think we can all agree that there's parable talk in here. When we read it, just look at how big everything becomes, right? It was a big boat and a big fish and a big city that took 4 days to walk across from one end to the other, and that didn't exist back then, right? But there's this emphasis on the bigness of things, right? Like it's almost like it's like a satire thing. Like when you read it, it's supposed to be kind of over the top, like extreme, right? Over the top extreme, and you're supposed to see that, right? You're supposed to see that this is just like over the top, like this storyteller's really going in on it, okay? And because of that, there's some things that you're supposed to see out of it, but sometimes because of these things, we don't see everything that there is, because it's almost like we're trying to pick up. My grandma watched soap operas, right? When I was a kid, she recorded them on VHS, and she would watch them, and she would eat Hershey kisses, right? And I like to eat Hershey kisses, and I like to hang out with my grandma. And so sometimes I would go and I would watch an episode of like The Young and the Restless or something with her, or whatever they're called. Right? I don't know the names of them, but that's one of them. I don't know the whole storyline. No, but I wouldn't watch them like she would watch every episode, right? And she would know the story, and I would come in. And I'd be a little lost because someone's always trying to run over somebody or kill somebody in that movie, and you don't know why. They were like friends and lovers, and now they're trying to kill each other. And if you don't stay up to date with what's going on, you're lost, right? They're just like, and that's how I was. I would sometimes come in, and I would be lost, and I would kind of pick up on what was going on, and then I would not hang out for a week or so, and I come back in, and all of a sudden the person that was trying to run over this person is now married to this person, and it's very weird how all that happened. And now the coma person's woke up, and it's just a lot. There's a lot to keep up with. All right. Um, and sometimes we do that with the Bible, right? If we don't know the backstory, we don't know what's going in. We try to just catch up, right? We try to just come in, we jump into it, and we kind of miss what was really going on. Okay. And so let's look at Jonah 1. Let's just read the first 3 verses. Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah, the son of a, I looked up how to say this word and I forgot because my brain is not working. Amitai is what we're going to say. It's probably wrong. It's okay. I'll tell you what it means in a second. Because you're supposed to laugh right here. Saying, arise and go to Nineveh, the great city, and call out against it, for their evil has come up before me. But Jonah rose and fled to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord, and he went down to Joppa and found a ship going to Tarshish. So he paid the fare, and he went down into it to go with them to Tarshish, away from the presence of the Lord. All right. I told you were supposed to laugh right there because Jonah, do you guys know what Jonah means? Jonah means dove. Okay? Dove. And we all know the symbolism behind dove and faithfulness and God, right? And his spirit. And then Amitai means faithfulness. So it's like he's like his name is like the dove of faithfulness. And the reason it's funny is because who's the least faithful person in this whole entire story? Jonah, right? Like he's like the least faithful, like the heathen boat people, like the pagan sailors were more faithful than he was, right? Nineveh becomes more faithful than he is, right? And Nineveh's a crazy city, right? We'll get into that in just a little bit. But even the cows in Nineveh are more faithful than he is, because it says even the cows repent, right? Like Jonah is like the least faithful. And it's crazy because who does Jonah represent in this story? Huh? Well, I'm sorry. I can't hear you, the thing. The captain? No. Who does Jonah represent? It's in 1:1. It's in chapter 1, verse 1. In the very first thing that you read. Now the word of the who? Lord. Who does the word of the Lord come to? But like, what do you call those people? A messenger, but none of the word for messenger is prophet, right? It's crazy because who is Jonah supposed to represent? The Lord, right? He's the one in this story that the word of the Lord comes to. He's the one that's supposed to be representing God, right? He is supposed to be representing God's image on this earth, right? He is a prophet. That's what prophets do. They speak on behalf of God, right? And it's crazy because you would think that Jonah's the only story like this. It's the only prophet that is not just like a collection of their prophecies, not a collection of their teachings or what they were saying on God's behalf. This is actually a story, right? You don't get, the only thing that you get of Jonah's like speaking on God's behalf is in Hebrew, it's a 5-word sermon that he didn't put a whole lot of effort into, right? That's all you get from him speaking. But this guy is supposed to represent God, right? This guy is supposed to represent who God is and speak on his behalf. And he is the most unfaithful one in the entire story, right? And I hope that you see by the end of this, what's going to happen is we're going to look at the story. And there's like this satire thread throughout all of it, right? And what it's supposed to do is you're supposed to look at it and be like, how could Jonah do this? Like, Jonah, that's crazy. Like, you've missed it so far. You're so far in left field. Like even the cows are doing better than you, right? And you're supposed to like look at how bad. And what happens is before you know it, the story shifts to being about Jonah and starts being about you. Right? And how many times has God's people who's supposed to represent God blown it more than everybody on earth? Right? And how many times have I, as a representative of God, have become centered on myself and what I want to do and the things that I like? And I'm supposed to be a representative of God, and I'm the one that's blown it, right? The people that don't believe in God are more faithful than I am. Right? And so hopefully throughout this we'll start to see this kind of start to shift. But there's this huge picture of Jonah, and you're reading it and you're like, wow, Jonah's a bad dude. Right? Because that's what the whole book of Jonah is about, is how bad Jonah is. Right? How terrible of a person Jonah is. That's a whole story of Jonah. Right? Because if I was to ask you guys, why did Jonah not want to go to Nineveh? What would you say? What would you say? I thought my whole life, let me just tell you what I would think. What I thought my whole life before I actually read Jonah like an adult. Um, I thought he didn't want to go because he was scared. Because Nineveh was wicked, right? Like it was it was it was the capital city of Assyria at that time, right? And it was common practice for these people to go in, take over a city, and skin the leaders alive, like in front of the whole like in front of the whole town. That was common practice for them, right? Like wicked, like you know what I mean? Like they would go in, conquer a city, skin the leaders in front of everybody. That's who these guys were, right? And so I thought that he was scared because all the children's books leave out Jonah 4, right? They don't talk about Jonah 4 where Jonah was mad at God. They leave that out, right? Everyone I've ever seen, they leave out that part. And I can understand why. It's hard to get that message across to kids, right? You don't want your kids to you don't want to teach your kids how to be mad at God, right? And it's a very complex, complex thing to try to explain to your children, right? So I can see why they just, we don't need that one in there. We just let people think that Jonah didn't go because he was scared. Jonah didn't go because he didn't want these people to be saved, right? He makes it very clear in Jonah 4. He gets upset with God because of how merciful God is, right? He's like, I knew you were going to do this, God. I knew because like everybody repents. Like he gives a 5-word message that he didn't put any effort into because he didn't want these people to be saved. He didn't want these people to be delivered. He didn't want these people to know God. He didn't put any effort into it. God blessed it so much so that the cows got saved. And he's like, I knew you would do this, God. I knew you would be that. I knew you would be so merciful and gracious unto them. I knew you would do it. I didn't want to come here because I knew you would be good. Right? So this whole story is about how bad Jonah is and how much he fights with the Lord about this, right? And so he decides, he gets this word, he's supposed to go to Nineveh. He decides, don't want to do that. I don't want these people to experience the goodness of God. Right? I don't want these people to experience the goodness of God. And so what happens? What does he decide to do instead? He flees, right? He goes down. And if you read in Jonah, right, let's just look at it. So let's just read 1 through 3 again, just to kind of get this in our minds, right? Now the word of the Lord came to the prophet Jonah, saying, arise and go to Nineveh, the great city, and call out against it, for their evil has come up before me. But Jonah rose and fled to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. He went down to Joppa and found a ship going to Tarshish. So he paid the fare and went down into it to go with them to Tarshish away from the presence of the Lord, right? There's just like this repeating thing of like down. He's going down, right? Down into himself. Not where God is wanting him, but down, right? And so I got a map. I don't know if you, oh, cool, yes. All right. So this is Joppa, right? Or Joppa, whatever you want to call it. It's all right. But this is where Jonah is, right? This is where he's supposed to go. So where does Jonah go? The furthest part of the known world, right? This is the furthest part of the known world. They don't know anything else other than this. He went as far as he possibly could, right? Like this is all that they know. This is the world that they know, right? They don't know there's anything else over the seas, right? They don't know about that stuff. So he goes to as far as he knows in the opposite direction. Right? Do you like see the satire there? Do you see like this kind of like build up, like everything is bigger in this story, right? He didn't just go to Egypt. That would have been way too convenient, way too. He went as far as he possibly could, right? Like to the ends of the world. He's like, I'm gonna go all the way there, right? And like everything in the story, everything in the story is just over the top, right? There is nothing of this story that is just like a practical thing. It is all over the top, right? There's this satire. There's a satire thread through it all. That's actually really funny once you start to see it, right? And it's a really awesome way of writing because the author, what he is doing in this story, he's actually making fun of Jonah, and what you realize, he's actually making fun of you, right? It's kind of like what Saturday Night Live does, right? Saturday Night Live blows up like the worst parts of Americans, and we all watch it and laugh, and and then you're like, oh crap, I'm laughing at myself, right? Like once you like get done with the thing, get done with the bit, and you look at it like, oh man, that's our news they're making fun of, right? Oh, that's our president that they're making fun. Like you know what I mean? And like Jonah's doing this kind of same thing. Like it's like this over the top kind of thread that's going through the whole story, and you're like laughing at Jonah, like, I can't believe it, Jonah. Like even the cows are more faithful than you. Like even these pagan sailors are more faithful than you. Like you've really blown it this time, Jonah. Ah ha 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 ha. And then you get to the end of the story, and you're like, oh no, I'm the Jonah, aren't I? Right? I'm the Jonah, aren't I? Like, oh no. This guy that I was laughing at, like, I'm him. I'm him at times, aren't I? God has called me to do things, and I have gone the complete opposite direction before. Right? God has called me to do things that I wasn't sure about or did not want to do for whatever reason, and I've went the complete opposite direction, right? How many people have had God lay something on your heart, and you decide to do the exact opposite of that, right? It's like, God calls you to play piano, and you're like, no, I'm going to not do that. I'm gonna race cars instead. Right? Like you do the exact opposite thing. Huh? Oh. But like how many times have God called you to do something and for whatever reason you didn't feel qualified enough, you didn't feel like you could. Right? So you decided to go the opposite direction. So this is what Jonah does is he goes the opposite direction. And I want to talk about why he does this. Flip over to Jonah 4. We're gonna spend maybe a couple weeks in Jonah. We're gonna kind of dive into Jonah, right? We're gonna kind of start to tear this apart. But I kind of wanted to give you guys the overview today, and then we'll kind of get into the nitty gritty of it in the next Sunday. Jonah 4, 1-3. This is why Jonah didn't go. But it displeased Jonah exceedingly, and he was angry. And he prayed to the Lord and said, O Lord, is not this what I said when I was yet in my country? That is why I made haste to flee to Tarshish, for I knew that you are a gracious God and merciful, slow to show anger, and abounding in steadfast love, and relenting from disaster. Therefore now, O Lord, please take my life from me. For it is better for me to die than it is to live. Right? That's funny. It's sad, but also funny because it's this over the top kind of thing. He was like, I knew you were good. Right? Like, I knew you were good. I knew you would do this. I knew I would come, and no matter what I would do, you would use it. People would be saved. Like, I knew you would do this, God. I knew you would be good. Right? And so now, let me die. Right? Let me die because of your goodness and you're showing your goodness to other people. Let me die, right? For it's better for me to die than it is to live and see your goodness for my enemies, right? Like this over-the-top kind of thing. And I want to talk about this because this is what Jonah's about. It's not about a whale. We're going to talk about the whale, right? You can't talk about Jonah without talking about the whale. I know. We'll talk about him. Okay? We'll talk about him. It was a very minor point in the story, right? But we have kind of stripped down the book of Jonah to whether you believe miracles can happen or not by whether you believe that Jonah actually was in the belly of a fish for 3 days or not, right? And to me, that's not what the story was ever about, right? It's not what the story was ever about. It was never about that. It's much more about the fact that once you read Jonah and you start laughing at Jonah through all the stuff, all the dumb things that Jonah did and going to the very ends of the world to avoid God, and then you get to the end of Jonah and you're like, oh man, been laughing at myself the whole time, right? And so I kind of want to boil down, I kind of want to look about what I feel Jonah is actually about. And Jonah to me is actually about obedience, right? And obedience is a hard word for Americans, right? We don't like obedience. We're America. We're free, right? And do what we want to do, right? We don't like obedience. We don't like to obey, right? And the reason that this is about obedience to me is because this is about learning. Because you flip over to Jonah, and you're like, oh, here's that God again in the Old Testament. We don't like the Old Testament a lot because God commands things in the Old Testament, right? We're like, oh, here's that old commanding God again, commanding his people to obey things, right? We kind of just skip through the things like, let me get to the part where he loves me, right? We kind of skip over the obedience part. But here's why this obedience part is so important. Um, I have kids. You guys have seen them. And I took the kids to the pool the other day. Took them to the pool Saturday, right? And I realized that being a parent of toddlers and 5-year-olds and 4-year-olds is basically like I spend my whole day trying to keep them alive, right? Stop running, get around the pool. Why? Because you can slip and die. And then I got to jump in and save you. Malachi, put your life vest back on. Why? Because you don't know how to swim. What do you mean, why? Like, you don't know how to swim yet. Can I completely submerge myself in the hot tub? No. Your body can't dissipate the heat fast enough. You will boil yourself like a lobster. Right? Like, it's trying to keep my kids alive the whole time. Yeah. They don't care. Like, no, like Asher, I didn't teach him how to do this. He figured it out himself. Like, he will stand on the edge of the pool and he'll just do this. And like, just straight, never bend. Just straight. Like, very good belly flop technique. And my kids don't realize that I'm not trying to keep them from having fun. That's why I brought them to the pool. I want them to have fun. Right? And I'm not like a crazy, like, over the top, like, parent. Like, I let my kids explore and do things that are slightly unsafe. Right? Um, but a lot of times they fight back against me sometimes because they think I'm trying to keep them from fun. And I'm not. I'm actually trying to keep them in the parameters where they can actually have fun and not die. Right? Like, it's a whole lot more fun if you don't drown, I promise. Right? And I realize this about God in my life is when God calls me to this thing and he gives me commands and he's calling me to obey. It's not that God is on some kind of like power trip where he needs to see if Corey will listen. Right? That's not my God. My God doesn't have power trips. My God is very graceful and merciful, right? And full of grace, right? And patient. Dude is patient, man. If you don't believe me, just read the Old Testament. He is patient, right? I'd have gave up on Jacob a long time ago, right? I'd have gave up on him a long time ago. That dude was wild, right? He lied to his own dying blind father, right? Like, that's messed up. Like, your own dad is dying and he's blind and you trick him. Like, I've done a lot of terrible things, but I haven't tricked my dying blind father, right? I'd have gave up on him a long time ago, but God is patient, right? And he gives these commands, and they're not about just seeing if you'll follow the rules. Like, if you can get anything out of this message, it's not about just seeing if you will follow God's rules. It's not about just seeing if you follow his commands. It's about learning to know his heart in these things. And when he gives you commands, it's not about just seeing how high you'll jump or if you'll do it, but it's actually to keep you in the will of God. Like, right, becoming a Christian is laying down your idea of what you think your life is going to become and picking up what Christ says it is. Right? That's what a Christian is. Right? And that's what we're all supposed to be doing, but we don't preach that enough in churches, and we don't talk about that enough in discipleship classes, and we don't really look like this enough, right? We've kind of just become this inclusive like club, and that's not what Christianity is, right? Christianity is literally laying down the way that you think life is going to go and picking up what Christ says life is, right? It's about choosing to follow him, knowing the richer parts of life are only found where he is leading, right? It's like, I thought this is what life was all about, right? I thought this was what was going to make me happy. I thought this was what was going to bring me joy. And then I come to Christ and I actually realize that the richest parts of life are only found in following him, right? You guys know the story of the rich young ruler? You guys know that story? Let me give you a quick overview of it just to refresh your memory. But there's this guy that came out to Jesus, right? Jesus was walking in the city. This guy came out to him. And he says, what do I need to do to inherit eternal life? Right? And what did Jesus say? Keep the commandments, right? That's what he said. A lot of us don't like that. That's what he said. And the guy is like, I've done everything perfectly my whole life. Never messed up one time. Right? Which I think, that's a crazy answer, man. That's not, A, probably not true. Don't know you, but probably not true. And B, wow, that's pretty prideful of you. Right? But that's not what Jesus said. Jesus actually, it says, this guy gives this answer, and Jesus says that he looks at him and he loves him. Right? Because I'm looking at it like you're lying to Jesus. But Jesus hears this and actually, it specifically says he looks at him and loves him. Right? Like, and out of the love in his heart, he gives the hardest command for this guy of all. Because this guy had a lot of stuff. Right? What was that command that Jesus said? Go and sell all your possessions and follow me. And I think some of the saddest words are mentioned after this. And it says that the guy went away sad, for he had many possessions. And it's heartbreaking for me. Because of this guy's stuff. And this is back like in the ancient times. It wasn't even cool stuff like a sea-doo or like this is lame things like a horse or something. Like, it wasn't even cool possessions. But because of this man's stuff, he went away sad, for he had many possessions. I started to think about what this guy missed out on because of his stuff. Right? And he missed out on seeing a girl that was dead come back to life. He missed out on seeing Lazarus, who was dead for 3 days, come back to life. He missed out on seeing the lame walk, the blind see, the deaf hear. Right? He missed out on seeing Jesus put an ear back on a guard. He missed seeing what real love looks like and what real power looks like. And real power is laying your life down, right? He missed out on spending time with the Messiah, which he recognized to be the Messiah. He recognized Jesus. I don't know. I don't want to put words in his mouth. He recognized Jesus to be someone special, right? You don't ask this question to just Joe Smo, right? He recognized Jesus to be someone special. And he let his stuff keep him from following God. Right? And then we flip over to Jonah and we see that Jonah let his pride keep him from following God. Right? His arrogance keep him from following God. And that's what I want to spend just a little bit of time on this evening or this morning or whatever time it is. Is if you would just stop and honestly reflect in your life, you would probably see there's these areas of your life that are keeping you from following what God is actually saying, right? That are keeping you from doing what God has actually called you to do. There's some areas that you guys are excelling in, right? There's some areas that you are doing really well in right now. But if you are honest with yourself, there's probably some things in your life that are keeping you from experiencing everything that God wants you to experience, right? There were some things going on in Jonah that was keeping him from it. This rich young ruler, there was things going on in his life. His possessions were keeping him from it, right? And I just want to stop, and as we reflect on Jonah, as we reflect on this rich young ruler, as we reflect and we continue on in Jonah, I want you to see that these things, they just kind of surface, and they cause us to do really crazy things, and they cause us to be the least faithful in situations, right? That God's people become the least faithful people sometimes, right? Because we're going to look at Jonah. The pagan sailors were more faithful. Right? The fish was more faithful. The people that used to skin leaders alive in the city square were more faithful. And the cows of that city were even more faithful. That one, I can't help but because it makes me laugh. Like, how do cows repent? The Bible has humor in it, right? The Bible has humor in it. It is sacred texts that we have that show us the character of God and show us who Jesus Christ is, right? But there is all kinds of writing techniques in it. It's got some of the most beautiful poetry I've ever read. It's got some of the way it hides the deepest truths in the most simple of sentences. Right? It's got some awesome satire, which is one of my favorite things in it. Right? And if you don't believe me, there's like Elijah. Do you guys remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Do you remember what Elijah was doing to the prophets of Baal? He was punking them, right? The entire time he was like, maybe you should pray louder. Maybe your God's asleep. Like, that's verbatim what he said. Maybe he's on a faraway trip and he can't be bothered with you right now. And if you don't start to see some of these themes inside of it, you will actually miss out on what the book is trying to tell us, right? Jonah is a very unique book in the Bible. It is the only is the only book of the prophets that is a story. Right? There is no other book of the prophet that is a story like Jonah is. And there is another book of the prophet that is as bad on the person that it's supposed to be about, like Jonah. Right? And it's all supposed to highlight this thing that you're supposed to get to the end of the story and you're supposed to laugh at Jonah and be like, what an idiot Jonah is. I can't believe he's so crazy. And you get to the end of the story and all of a sudden there's like this laser dot on your chest. And you look down and you're like, well darn. The story was actually about me, wasn't it? It had nothing to do with the fish. The story was about how wicked my heart is at times. And how my pride wants to keep me from doing things. And how there's things inside my heart that makes me want to go to the ends of the earth just to not to follow God. Right? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to have the worship team come up again for just a little bit. Some of them have a baby. And I just want to have you guys stand with me. And I just want you to have a time of reflection. I'm just going to ask that all your eyes will be closed during this time. And it's not because it's just sometimes easier to drown out the world and reflect and ponder on your heart when your eyes are closed. At least for me it is. And you stop worrying about what everybody else around you is doing. And so I'm just going to ask that you would close your eyes and that you would just reflect on your heart. You just reflect on your heart and what things are in your heart that, like Jonah or this rich young ruler, would keep you from following God, would keep you from following God's commands. Because I promise you that when God commands, it's not just to see if you will do it. This was not about just to see if Jonah was doing it. It was actually about bringing light into people that were in darkness and bringing understanding to people that had no understanding, right? It's about his saving power being released on this earth. And just like ones that have kids and you put rules in place, it's not just because you want to see if your kids will obey. It's because you want to keep them safe because you love them. And sometimes we feel that we are more safe, or we feel that we know better, and we feel like we could do better, and so we get in our boat and we travel as far away as we can. But luckily we serve a loving God who is faithful and will not cease in his pursuit of our lives. He does not tire of pursuing us to get our attention, to reveal things in our hearts, to bring us to our knees, and allow us to rejoice in his goodness. And so I just want to have some time, and if you need to step out, you need to come to the altar, and you need to lay, or you just need to kneel and just spend time with God, please feel free to do that. If you're here and you don't know God, you don't know what it's like to serve this loving, kind Father, and choose a different worldview for your life, I would love to introduce you and lead you in a simple prayer that will completely change your life if you would allow it. And so we just want to give some time for the Spirit to move and for us to reflect. So Father, we just say, have your way in this place, Father. Move on our hearts, highlight our shortcomings, highlight the things that are hidden within our hearts, just like it was with Jonah and the rich young ruler, and we're not so different like them after all. And God, bring us into a place of trust, and we can trust you and see your goodness and be led by you. Father, we set this time aside to reflect and to engage with your heart. And we ask that as we draw near unto you, you will draw near to us, as you have promised. It's in Jesus' name.